Dear Contemporary, it is Wednesday, February 18th, 2026, and a big shift is happening in South America. A string of right-wing electoral victories in recent years has stalled the shift of Latin America to the left, which marked the 2010s and which had been dubbed the pink wave by commentators. Voters in Latin America are in a state of more or less constant discontent, which makes them prone to boot out their incumbent politicians periodically. Also, they do this in unison across countries, which means that roughly every 10 to 15 years, the majority of Latin American countries shifts from the right to the left or vice versa. But this time is different. This video will analyze the broader geopolitical trends and how they play into South America's politics and its role on the global chessboard. But before we get straight into that, if you like this video, please make sure to hit like and subscribe. Now, let's first take stock of the current situation and how we got here. Since the surprise victory of the libertarian Javier Milei in Argentina in 2023, more and more countries have followed suit. Bolivia voted in Rodrigo Paz in October 25. Honduras voted in Nasri Asfura in November 25. And Chile, just in January of this year, elected Jose Antonio Kast into office. It is beyond this video to go into all the details and explore the country-specific details of each of the above candidates. Even a superficial glance already reveals that there are vast differences in the ideologies of the candidates. Milei is clearly a libertarian, while Kast of Chile has a much more traditional right-wing authoritarian streak, which focuses on law and order, immigration control, and traditional Catholic social values. So the term conservative or right-wing is a catch-all simplification, but it serves for the purpose of this analysis. Because all the distinct right-wing movements have two things in common. They are against the left, and they are all pro-American. More specifically, they are pro-Trump America. Let's tackle each of these points at a time. First, the left-right divide in Latin America. It has been said that the Cold War never ended in Latin America, and this holds more than a grain of truth. Because the Latin left is carrying on with old ideological reflexes, geopolitical allegiances, and international hard-left networks. Many of these leading South American left-wingers have personal origin stories deeply intertwined with Marxism. For example, the current president of Colombia, Gustavo Petro, started out as a Marxist guerrilla fighter of the FARC, and Janel Jara, the contender for the Chilean presidency, who was decisively defeated by Jose Antonio Kast this January, she was the leading functionary of the Communist Party of Chile. And like Marxists usually do, these people see themselves as part of an international struggle against capitalism. And so they form tightly connected cross-border networks among themselves. Within this network, Cuba has long played a central role. Cuba is ruled by hardcore communists since its revolution in 1959, and in the 3 generations since, the regime in Havana has produced legions of well-trained ideological agitators and operatives that work to spread the hard-left policies throughout Latin America. But Cuba is not alone. There's Venezuela, that until recently used its oil to prop up the left-wing regimes in the Caribbean. There's Russia, still an old friend of South America's left, that provides intelligence. And then, of course, there's China. And China can provide almost anything at any quantity. Most of all, money. And China is also the primary beneficiary of the left-wing South America. You see, traditionally, the most important part of South American economies are the extractive industries of mining, oil, and also agriculture. And the battle between left and right in South America is basically about who can access the revenues from these resources. The right is staunchly neoliberal on this matter and wants to give the private capital free rein in extracting the rent from these resources. The left, on the other hand, wants to bring the extractive industries under state control, either through outright nationalization into public companies, such as the petrol companies of PDVSA of Venezuela, or Petrobras of Brazil, or by levying high taxes on the private owners of mining, agriculture, and carbohydrates. In any case, they aim to give the state the power to gatekeep the access to these resources through excessive regulations. In the highly corrupt societies of South America, this guarantees an attractive side income for countless bureaucrats. It also gives left-wing politicians the power to decide which company gets the mining concession and which company gets the drilling permit. And it is here where Chinese firms really profit from left-wing governments. As a consequence, it is not surprising that over the past 15 years, the Chinese have massively built out their economic presence in the Southern American continent. All South American countries, with the exception of Colombia and Ecuador, have China as their largest trading partner. Cheap Chinese consumer goods, construction machinery, and cars flood the local markets, making domestic industrial production uncompetitive. The natural resources, on the other hand, are exported on the cheap to China, where they are then refined and made into higher value-added products. This Chinese strategy is just as exploitative, if not more so, than the practices of American capitalism in the 20th century, which the Latin American left never tires to describe as gringo capitalism. So the real choice in Latin America is between the left and China, and the right in close economic relations with America. And this is the second commonality that the right-wing politicians in the various South American states share. Their desire to work closer with the United States, not only economically, but also in terms of policy and security. A stark example is Brazil, where the right-wing President Jair Bolsonaro sought a close alliance with America, while his left-wing successor, the current Brazilian President Lula, does everything he can to tie Brazil to China and Russia via the BRICS alliance. The problem that the Latin American right customarily faces is that the US government does not really much care about them, because usually political alignments do not coincide in the US and Latin America. The Clinton, Obama, and Biden administrations were cold with Latin American right-wingers, while the W. Bush administration in the 2000s was faced with left-wingers in office all across Latin America. With the Trump administration today, this is different. Latin American right-wing leaders from Milei, Bukele to Kast have close private and public connections to President Trump himself. And Trump is arguably the US president most focused on South America since at least the 1920s, if not ever. He's the first president who resides in Florida, America's most southern and most Hispanic state. He is the first American president who has appointed a Hispanic Secretary of State with Marco Rubio. And he openly declares the Western Hemisphere to be America's core interest. This co-alignment between the right-wing, southern-facing US government and a right-wing electoral wave in Latin America happens only once in a generation. It has happened last in the 1980s, when Reagan and Bush got involved in anti-drug operations in Latin America. And before that, it happened in the 1950s, when the Eisenhower administration could count on a tranquil Latin American backyard, ruled by conservative governments, which were all united in staunch anti-communism. But Trump's effect on Latin America may prove more profound than that of previous US presidents. In the past, Latin America had always been dependent on the US economically, no matter what the politics of the day were. Today, The continent has been deeply penetrated economically by foreign powers, China. And with time, economic sway translates into hard political influence. This may then become structural and permanently alienate South America from its larger northern neighbor, the United States. The Trump administration is committed to roll back this foreign influence. The Americans pursue this goal with two strategies: systematically destabilizing the Latin American left and propping up the Latin American right. This year, 2026, began with a spectacular US operation, the kidnapping of hard-left Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro by US Army Special Forces. This signals to everyone that the United States are back in South America, and it sends shivers down the spines of all left-wing politicians on the continent. Because if the sitting president of a large South American nation can be kidnapped while hiding in a fortress and being guarded by 5,000 soldiers, then really everyone can. No one is physically safe from America's reach, and there's nothing that the traditional allies of the left, China, Russia, Cuba, can offer in the way of protection. At the same time, the Trump administration is robust and generous in its support for the Latin American right. President Javier Milei of Argentina received a 20 billion US dollar loan from the US government just weeks before an important midterm election in Argentina, which he then proceeded to win. And in Honduras, the Trump administration made aid deliveries to the country conditional on the electoral win of the right-wing presidential candidate. In the election, this right-wing candidate, Nasri Asfoura, then proceeded to win. Trump is openly committed to flipping South America to the right. This year, in 2026, there are presidential elections due in Colombia in March, in Peru in April, and importantly, in Brazil in October. In Colombia and Peru, the right is already in the lead in the polls. In Brazil, President Lula can count on deep institutional support built during years of careful installing patronage networks. But on the other hand, the last Brazilian election in 2022 was very close. This year, Flavio Bolsonaro, the son of the right-wing president Jair Bolsonaro, is determined to win the election and free his father from prison where Lula has put him. The election in Brazil is truly pivotal. And with Trump's commitment to the Brazilian right generally, and the Bolsonaro family personally, extensive US support for Bolsonaro is sure to come. America will send money, spin doctors, campaign managers, and data analysts to Brazil. It will bring to bear the enormous influence of its tech and social media giants such as X and Facebook. And since the Maduro operation in Venezuela, we have also gotten an idea of just how massive the reach of the US intelligence agencies is in Latin America. It would not be the first time for the CIA to meddle in foreign elections. Nothing is certain yet, but if Lula falls in Brazil, the B in the BRICS would be gone. A massive hit for Russia and China, calling into question the whole narrative of the so-called Global South. South America would once again be America's tranquil backyard and an essential part of the Western economic alliance that the Trump administration is trying to build. Marco Rubio has called for a new Western alliance at the Munich Security Conference. With Latin America shifting to the right, this could become a greater Western alliance. If you like this analysis, please take like and subscribe to this channel. Also, if you would like to know more about Marco Rubio's proposed new Western alliance, please check out the video on his speech at the Munich conference. As always, thank you very much for watching and have an outstanding day.